Some kid was digging a hole next to my barn like it was a sandbox, and his mom told the other parents, "This whole area is going to be a park soon. HOA already approved it." She said it like I wasn't standing 10 feet away, like this wasn't my land. I grew up on this land. Same dirt, same trees, same wind rattling the boards of the barn when the weather rolls in from the west. You ever sleep in a house your grandfather built with his own hands? That kind of place gets into your blood. You don't just live on it, you become part of it. My great-granddad started the farm back when people still plowed with mules. He cleared the field by hand, built the first fence posts out of timber he cut himself. Then came my grandpa, then my dad, and then, well, me. I didn't plan on being a farmer, not exactly. I left for a while, joined the army, ran cables, fixed generators in places nobody wants to be, figured I'd do something else. But then life happened, and when Dad got sick, I came back. What else was I going to do? He needed help, and the land didn't take care of itself. When he passed, the whole place landed on my shoulders. I mean everything. The tractors, the fencing, the debt, the memories. Mom stayed in the old house. I moved into the one out by the road so I could be closer to the deliveries. My boy, Elliot, was still little then. He barely remembers my dad, but I do. I remember the way he walked the fields like he was checking on family. Thing is, a chunk of this land, about 30 acres toward the south end, we'd leased out. Back in the early days, it was just unused pasture. Then a developer showed up, some slick guy in a Cadillac, offering a long-term lease to build what they called a low-impact residential community. My dad wasn't a fan, but he said, if they want to throw money at nothing but weeds and rocks, let 'em. That's how Whispering Hills started. A few streets at first, nice little houses, then over the years it grew into this shiny beige machine. Fancy gates, matching mailboxes, people walking tiny dogs in matching sweaters. And over time, those 30 acres turned into a full-blown HOA suburb, manicured lawns, decorative boulders, solar-lit walkways. But it was still our land underneath all of it. See, there was a contract. Dad kept a tight file on it. Lease agreement, annual payments, maps, signatures, all notarized. He made sure they had to pay every year, and if they didn't, well, there was a clause. I didn't really know the details then. I just knew they paid, we cashed the check, and life moved on. But after he passed, things started slipping. First year, no payment. I was neck-deep in probate paperwork and medical bills, and honestly, I didn't even notice right away. Figured maybe there was a delay. Second year, still nothing. I sent a letter, no reply, then another. Then they stopped responding altogether. Not a word, just silence. I called the HOA office. Some lady put me on hold for 10 minutes, came back, and said she couldn't discuss community finances with non-members. I said, "Lady, you're sitting on my damn land." She hung up. I should have pushed harder. I know that now. But back then, I had a farm to run. My kid was starting school, Mom needed help around the house, irrigation was giving me hell, and there's only so many hours in a day. I told myself I'd deal with it later, that maybe it was a fluke, or they'd fix it next year. They didn't. Year after year, they just acted like I didn't exist, like the contract didn't exist, like my father never shook hands with that developer or signed anything at all. They mowed the lawns, built gazebos, ran their HOA meetings in a little clubhouse that sat squarely on my side of the lease line, and every time I drove by, something felt off, like I was watching a magic trick, like they were slowly erasing us. But I wasn't going to make a scene without proof. You can't take on a neighborhood full of lawyers and lawn committees just by yelling. I needed something real, something binding. And then Mom found the box. She was going through the attic looking for an old photo album and came across one of Dad's lockboxes. It was the heavy kind, fireproof, full of paper and dust, and those tiny little paper clips he used on everything. Inside, right there under his discharge papers and some old tractor titles, was a folder marked in his handwriting, Whispering Hills. It had everything, the original lease agreement, maps, correspondence, checks, and then I saw the clause. Buried near the end, under all the formal language, was one sentence. Failure to remit payment for more than 180 days shall be considered default, at which point all property and structures on leased land revert to ownership of the lessor in perpetuity. I didn't believe it at first. I read it 5 times. Then I checked the dates. Then I felt the heat rise in my chest. They didn't just owe me rent. They owed me everything. The first time I knew something was really off, it was this dumb little sign. I was driving back from town, coming up the gravel road that cuts behind the leased land, and I noticed a brand new metal post sticking out of the grass. At first I thought it was for a utility marker, or maybe one of those little caution, kids at play, things HOAs love to nail into the ground. but when I pulled closer, I saw it had this plastic plaque on top, shiny and green and friendly looking. It said, "Future site of Whispering Hills Community Garden, residents only." And it was planted not just near the edge of the line, it was a solid 20 feet into the field. My field. I parked the truck halfway on the shoulder, climbed out, and just stared at the damn thing. It wasn't even subtle. It wasn't some accidental landscaping job that strayed over the line. This was them planting a flag. I took a photo, went back home, pulled out the old lease maps from Dad's file, and checked it twice, just to be sure. The garden sign was right on the old fence line, maybe even past it, which meant they didn't just think they could use the land. They were planning long term. Later that week, I drove by again and saw 3 folding chairs and a little table set up nearby, like someone had been having coffee out there. HOA types, no doubt. That same evening, I spotted a woman with a clipboard leading 2 couples around, pointing out where the beds would go and how the HOA budget already had funds set aside for native flora. She said it with that voice people use when they're overly proud of themselves for doing something basic. I didn't say anything that time. I just watched from the truck. It wasn't that they were being aggressive. That's the part that got me. It was like they didn't even see me, like I wasn't even part of the equation. No emails, no calls, no knock on my door to ask permission. Just slow creep. 1 picnic table here, 1 signpost there, a little walking trail cutting through the tree line where kids used to play when I was their age. They weren't attacking, they were absorbing. And I kept telling myself, maybe it's a mistake. Maybe some new HOA president just didn't get the memo. Maybe I'd send 1 last letter and they'd realize they screwed up, cut me a check, and we'd go back to the way things were. But that letter never got answered. None of them did. And the signs kept showing up. I think the moment that really sank in, the first moment I knew they weren't just being forgetful, was when I saw the benches. 2 of them. Pressure-treated wood, freshly sealed, facing each other under that big old sycamore by the irrigation ditch. That tree's been there since before my father was born. When I was a kid, I'd lie under it to get away from the sun after picking rock. It's deep on our land, not even near the old lease boundary, not like the garden sign. There was no notice, no call. Just one day, bam, benches, set in gravel, surrounded by those little rubber mats you only see in HOA places where someone's afraid of being sued if Mrs. Lively trips in her flip-flops. And I remember standing there with my coffee, just staring at them. They looked so damn peaceful, like something out of a real estate brochure. Like someone wanted it to feel like part of a nature walk. But they weren't theirs. They were mine. And it wasn't just the benches. A day or 2 later, some contractor truck pulls up with those solar-powered lanterns they always line along walkways, and the guy hops out, starts digging little holes right along the path that used to lead from the old watering station to the fence line. I go out to ask him what he's doing. He barely looks up, just says, "HOA got a work order, buddy. Trail extension for the wellness loop." I said, "You know this is private property, right?" He shrugs. Not what they told me. And then he just goes back to digging. I didn't yell, didn't pull rank, just walked back to the house. I wasn't about to brawl with some kid in a neon vest holding a garden spade, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. They weren't just stretching boundaries anymore. They were rewriting the map, 1 tiny improvement at a time. 1 flower bed, 1 light pole, 1 yoga mat closer to the barn. And here's the kicker. It wasn't even malicious. That's what made it worse. There wasn't some villain twirling his mustache behind the HOA desk. It was just quiet, smiling erasure. Like they'd decided the story of this place didn't include us anymore. No threats, no letters, just benches. And I realized this wasn't about forgetting. This was about pretending we were never here. It didn't take long before things went from annoying to surreal. First, they paved the trail, that dirt path that used to just run between the fields. I used to ride my bike down it when I was a kid, back when it was just 2 tire grooves from an old tractor. Suddenly it had edging stones, landscaping lights, and fresh blacktop. Blacktop. They even put down one of those tiny metal plaques, the kind with fake historical value, Whispering Loop Est. HOA 2004. No one called, no one asked, and of course the trail veered even deeper onto my side than before, like a drunk man trying to find a shortcut to dignity. Then came the drone. Yeah, a drone. I was out near the north fence line one morning, checking on the drainage trench after a storm, and I heard that soft buzzing overhead, like a lazy mosquito. Looked up and there it was, just hanging in the air, one of those 4-prop camera things. It wasn't just flying through, it stopped, tilted, aimed, at me. I stood there, muddy boots, shovel in hand, looking up like some idiot in a documentary about going off-grid. The drone hovered for a while, then zipped back toward the HOA clubhouse like a tattletale that just caught me peeing on a bush. I didn't say anything that day, but I started noticing them more often, not just drones, people. They'd walk by slower than usual on the paved path, look toward my place. Some of them whispered to each other. A couple even stopped and took photos, actual photos, like my old barn was some kind of public curiosity or zoning violation. Then came the letters. But not to me, to the county. One day I get a visit from a guy in khakis and a polo, badge on his belt, clipboard in hand. Says he's responding to multiple anonymous complaints about unpermitted agricultural storage and potential environmental hazards from runoff, which is their way of saying my compost pile and irrigation tank look messy. He was polite. I was polite. I let him walk the property. He didn't seem thrilled to be there, but the whole time I could see it on his face. He didn't know what the hell he was doing out here. Next week, it was the power company. Then, a letter from the zoning office about a potential violation of fence line uniformity, whatever the hell that means. I started seeing more HOA trucks coming and going on the gravel road. Not just lawn guys, white SUVs with tinted windows and Whispering Hills stickers on the side. Sometimes they'd stop for a second at the edge of my property like they were taking mental notes. Then, one morning, I found fresh chalk lines on the grass behind the barn. Someone had marked measurements, with spray paint. That was it. That was the moment the anger really took root. Because that wasn't a garden, or a trail, or benches. That was a message. We're coming. They didn't need a bulldozer or a court order. They were using the one thing I'd ignored for too long. Silence. The kind that fills up space until it pushes you out of your own damn story. And I'll admit, part of me started wondering if they were right. Not legally, not morally, but practically. I'm one guy, a single dad with a farm that eats up most of my time and all of my savings. They're a whole machine. Meetings, lawyers, money, structure. They don't knock down walls, they wait for them to rot, and then build a gazebo on top of the rubble. I wasn't scared, not exactly, but I was starting to feel small, smaller than I ever had on this land. And that scared the hell out of me. I didn't go in swinging. That's not how I was raised. My dad always said, start with your hand out, not your fist. So that's what I did. First thing I tried was just calling. Simple, right? I found the HOA number on their little website. You know the type, one of those sterile, overly formal ones with generic stock photos of smiling people and trees that somehow always look like they're in Maine. I left a message, then another, finally got a real person. She had one of those customer service voices, all polite but stiff, like she was reading off a laminated script. I told her my name, the parcel number, the history, and that I just wanted to speak with someone about the use of the land. She said she'd escalate it to the board, which of course means absolutely nothing. So I sent a letter, then another, typed, signed, mailed, certified, copies of the lease agreement included, highlighted neatly with sticky tabs and everything. I figured, okay, I'll be official, give them no reason to say I'm being unreasonable. Weeks passed, nothing. Then I tried showing up in person. They hold these monthly HOA meetings at the community center. You know the type, all bright lights, folding chairs, water pitchers that smell like lemon-scented floor cleaner. I walked in and heads turned like I'd tracked in manure. A couple folks smiled awkwardly. Most didn't. One guy in a tight golf polo and boat shoes looked like he'd just bitten into a lemon. When I asked if I could speak at the meeting, some lady with shoulder pads and a clipboard said the meeting was only open to current HOA members. I told her politely that they were currently occupying 30 acres of my family's land and hadn't paid rent in 5 years, so I figured I had a stake. She smiled like she was being held hostage, said, "You can submit a written statement to the board," which I already had. Twice. I tried going through the county thinking maybe there was some oversight board, some zoning committee, someone whose whole job was to handle weird land disputes like this. Every office I called bounced me to a different one. One guy gave me the number of a property records specialist, who turned out to be a voicemail inbox that never called back. I even reached out to a real estate attorney I found online. Friendly guy, talked fast, looked tired even over the phone. He read the lease, said it looked strong, then gave me a number I couldn't even repeat without wincing. Said if I wanted him to handle it, I'd need a $10,000 retainer. Minimum. Land cases like this are tricky, he said. HOAs are messy. Even when you're right, you gotta be able to afford to be right. That stuck with me. You gotta afford to be right. I started asking around locally. One of my buddies from the feed store gave me the number of some retired judge out of county who might be able to point you the right way. I left him 2 voicemails. Never heard back. I wasn't looking to sue anybody. I didn't want to burn the place down. Hell, if they'd just sat down with me and made a payment plan or even admitted they'd screwed up, we could have worked it out. My dad always told me that land is only as peaceful as the people walking on it. I just wanted peace, but they wouldn't even acknowledge I existed. I remember one afternoon, I was out near the fence line watching this little HOA kid chase his dog across the field. Kid looked like he was having the time of his life, and I thought, I don't blame the kid. I don't blame the families. They don't even know this isn't theirs. They were sold a lie by people in suits who smile in front of notaries. But then I looked at the clubhouse, my land, their building, and I felt it. This pressure behind my ribs, like holding your breath too long in your own house. That deep, quiet kind of anger that doesn't come with yelling. Just a long, low promise inside you. I'd done everything I could to resolve it their way, the polite way, the civil way, and all I got in return was silence. So I stopped asking, and I started digging. It happened in the middle of a rainstorm, of all things. I'd been going through my dad's old papers for weeks by then. Every night, after putting Elliot to bed, I'd sit at the kitchen table with that old steel lockbox, the one with the rusted hinges and the little clasp that always stuck. I had papers spread across the table like I was running a campaign. Lease agreements, tax statements, aerial maps from before drones were even a thing. Most of it I'd already read half a dozen times. But that night, while the rain pounded against the roof like it was trying to get in, I noticed a smaller envelope tucked behind a packet of old receipts. Yellowed, folded over twice. Dad's handwriting on the front, barely legible, contingency clause, original. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. I knew that tone. That was the voice my dad used when something wasn't just important, it was final. Inside was a clean copy of the lease. Not the one I'd been flipping through all month. This one had a gold seal from the notary's office, fresh ink signatures, and a typed addendum I hadn't seen before. Right at the end, page 13 of 13, was the clause. In the event of non-payment exceeding 180 consecutive days, all property and structures built upon leased land shall revert to the lessor's sole ownership, in perpetuity, without contest or compensation. I read it again, then out loud, like maybe I was misunderstanding something. They hadn't paid in over 5 years. Not one check, not $1, not even a handwritten IOU. Which meant by the language of that agreement, my dad's agreement, the entire 30-acre footprint of Whispering Hills, everything south of the original fence line, belonged to me now. Not just the land, the clubhouse, the trails, the roads, the homes, all of it. I sat there for a long time, listening to the rain and holding that paper in both hands like it was going to disintegrate. I felt hot and cold at the same time. My brain was running in circles, trying to figure out how this could be real. How something this massive could have been sitting in a box in my kitchen while I chased phone calls and wrote letters that nobody cared about. They weren't just wrong, they were trespassing. They'd built a whole damn community on land they were supposed to pay for, and when my father died, they quietly stopped writing checks and just pretended the deal had never existed. But my dad knew. He knew how people like that think. How quick they are to forget the handshake once the old man's out of the way. That's why he buried that clause in the lease like a landmine. He knew if they ever got greedy, it wouldn't just come back to bite them. It would take the whole machine down with it. And now here I was, sitting with the trigger. I didn't feel excited, not yet. What I felt was heavy. This wasn't a win, not yet. It was a weapon, one I wasn't sure I even wanted to use, but I also knew, deep down, there was no going back. Because they'd made it clear they weren't going to pay. They weren't going to talk. They weren't going to admit anything. They thought they'd buried me. But they forgot my father planted things deep. I didn't jump into action right away. I'm not that kind of guy. And this wasn't the kind of situation where you storm into an office, waving a piece of paper and yell, "Checkmate." This was bigger than that. Too big to mess up. I needed to know what I was holding, and I needed to know I was right. So the first person I called was Martin. He was my dad's old attorney, retired now, lived out past the lake in a one-story house with a sagging porch and a lazy hound named Dusty. Last time I saw him, I was maybe 20, but the man never forgot a document, and he sure as hell never forgot a contract he drafted himself. When I handed him the copy of the lease, his face didn't even twitch. He just adjusted his glasses, leaned forward, and started reading like he was back in court. I sat across from him, hands in my lap, trying to act calm while my heart rattled around like a screw in a tin can. He read it twice, then looked up at me. "That clause is real," he said, tapping the page, "and it's enforceable." That was the first time I let myself feel it. Not anger, not anxiety, leverage. For the first time in 5 years, I had something they couldn't ignore. Martin laid it out for me. I couldn't just walk in and declare ownership. That's not how it works. But I could assert my rights. I could file a legal claim. I could send notice. I could go public. And if they pushed back, well, we had documentation, witnesses, paper trails, not to mention the sheer number of days they'd defaulted. But I knew this couldn't just be a legal fight. It had to be bigger than that. Because the HOA, they didn't care unless it hit their bottom line or their reputation. You start talking legalese, they just pass it off to one of their lawyers and go back to planning pet costume parades. So I needed noise. I needed neighbors to know. I needed county officials to hear. I needed them squirming in their seats during their next HOA meeting, wondering how in the hell a quiet farmer suddenly became their landlord. That's when I called Maya. We went to high school together. She was the yearbook editor, the kind of person who remembered everyone's middle name and made fun of them for it in a way that made you like her more. These days, she writes for the local paper. Does small town features, city council blurbs, the occasional zoning drama when the readers need something juicier than a lost dog report. I didn't tell her everything over the phone, just asked if she'd come by the farm, said I had something weird to show her. She showed up the next morning with a notebook, a recorder, and that same sideways smile she always had when she smelled a story. I laid it all out for her. The lease, the clause, the years of silence, the fact that technically, legally, I now owned every square inch of land Whispering Hills was sitting on. She stared at me for a long moment after I finished. "You serious?" she asked. I nodded. She blinked once, then leaned back and said, "This is going to be fun." From there, it all started coming together. Maya agreed to run the story, not a hit piece, not something angry or vengeful, just the facts, the quiet facts, a man ignored for years, a lease everyone forgot, a clause no one expected. Meanwhile, Martin helped me draft an official notice of ownership intent. We weren't suing yet. That would come later if it had to. This was just a polite tap on the shoulder. I printed out copies of the lease, the clause, the payment records, or rather the lack of them, and mailed them certified to the HOA board. I also sent a copy to the county assessor's office, just to start stirring the pot. Maya's article went live 2 days later. Title was simple, "Who Really Owns Whispering Hills?" It spread fast. Not viral, not national, but local fast, neighbor fast, Facebook mom group fast, HOA board group chat fast. And just like that, silence started cracking. I started getting emails, then phone calls, then one guy, I think his name was Derek, some HOA treasurer, drove out to my farm and tried to talk like we were old friends. Said it was all just a misunderstanding. Asked if maybe we could work something out privately. I told him he'd need to speak to my attorney. He didn't smile at that. By the end of that week, Maya called me laughing. Apparently, 3 board members had called an emergency session, and the clubhouse parking lot was packed. They thought they could erase us. Turns out, you can only paint over the past so many times before it starts bleeding through. And now? Now it was my turn to hold the brush. It started with a letter, thick envelope. My name printed clean on the front in all caps. Return address? Big law firm from the city. Not local. HOA had brought in the big guns. Inside was a cease and desist, 4 pages long, packed with legal jargon, citations, and just enough sharp corners to make you bleed if you weren't careful. They accused me of defamation, intentional disruption of community operations, and malicious interference with residential peace. That last one made me laugh out loud. Malicious interference, like I snuck into their yards at night and salted their hydrangeas. Martin read it, didn't blink, just muttered, "Standard intimidation play." Then he grabbed a pen, scratched a note in the margin, and passed it back like we were trading recipes. We sent our reply 2 days later, short, surgical, and backed by every inch of legal ground we had. Included copies of the lease, notarized and clean. Payment records, or again, the complete absence of them. And that clause, highlighted in yellow, boxed in red, bolded in black. The clause that said everything built on my land was mine now. The one they kept pretending didn't exist. Then things got quiet, but not the good kind. HOA pulled the classic move. They closed ranks. Suddenly, the public meetings weren't so public. They stopped updating their website. Neighbors started giving me strange looks at the feed store. Some just nodded politely and moved along. Others turned cold, the kind of cold where you can feel it through glass when their SUVs pass your driveway without slowing down. But I knew what was happening. They were panicking, and they were regrouping. The next swing came fast. One morning, Elliot comes in from the bus stop, says there's a guy in a suit standing by the mailbox. I walk out, and sure enough, some dude in loafers is just standing there, clipboard in hand, pretending to study something on the screen of his phone. When I ask who he is, he says he's conducting a property review for municipal assessment. I ask to see ID. He hedges. I press. He leaves. Quick. Maya found out later that week someone in the HOA board had tried to push an emergency petition through the zoning office. Their plan? Redefine the leased land as community easement retroactively, claiming the structures and roads were built in good faith under presumed ownership. Basically, rewrite history and hope nobody fights back. It didn't fly, not right away anyway, but it showed me they weren't just trying to stonewall, they were trying to erase the lease altogether. So we got louder. Maya ran another article, this one sharper. Title was Landmine in Whispering Hills, How an HOA Forgot to Pay Its Rent. It quoted Martin, cited county documents, and had a photo of my dad standing next to the original surveyor's stake, same one that still sat behind the clubhouse, now rusted and half buried in decorative bark mulch. The HOA fired back in the comments section, of course, claimed it was a one-sided narrative, that I was misrepresenting facts, that I was attempting to seize control of a peaceful neighborhood. Yeah, me, seizing control. Of the land they stopped paying for. The next week, someone knocked over my mailbox. Could have been a teenager. Could have been a message. Either way, I installed a camera. Then came the petition. A group of HOA residents, about 30 households, signed a letter demanding I cease all hostile actions against the Whispering Hills community. One of the signers was a guy I'd helped jump his truck 3 winters ago in the middle of a snowstorm. That part stung. But here's the thing, not everyone turned on me. One night, Brian Hodges showed up at my door. He's a newer resident, real estate agent, big watch, bigger truck. I figured he was there to chew me out. Instead, he handed me a flash drive and said, "You didn't get this from me?" Then he turned and left. On that drive, meeting minutes, internal emails, board discussions from the last few years, including one from the current president, Gary Sommers, openly acknowledging the lease issue but writing, "Unless he sues, we do nothing." They knew. They all knew. They just figured I'd roll over, that I didn't have the money, the time, or the fight in me, that I'd stay quiet because people like me are supposed to be too tired to push back. But now I had more than paper. I had proof of intent, and I had momentum. They tried to break me with silence, then with lawyers, then with fear, and none of it worked. Because they forgot. I don't need to shout. I just need to stand still long enough for the storm to come to me. The hearing wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no banging gavels, no courtroom monologues like in movies. Just a windowless room at the county office, 2 rows of plastic chairs, and a few people who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. But for me, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff with a match and a gallon of gas in hand. Martin sat beside me, briefcase open, lease copies stacked like playing cards. Maya was in the back row, notebook balanced on her knee, phone already recording. The HOA brought their guy too, some junior partner from the same downtown firm that sent me the cease and desist. Hair too perfect, smile too practiced. I recognized him from the glossy Our Legal Team tab on their website. When our time came, Martin stood up and walked them through everything. Calm, clean, no anger, just facts. The lease, the payment history, the clause, the documentation of 5 years non-payment. Then he dropped the emails Brian gave us, printed and highlighted with the one line that turned the room from bored to tense. Unless he sues, we do nothing. That line didn't hit like a bomb. It hit like a slow drip of gasoline catching a spark. The county official, older woman with glasses low on her nose, leaned forward and asked the HOA rep, "Is this authentic?" He hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. From there, it moved fast. The official said the ownership status of the land was legally questionable, and any claim of easement or HOA jurisdiction was in active dispute. She recommended the assessor's office place a temporary hold on all zoning changes and improvements until a final decision could be made in court. Translation? The HOA couldn't do a damn thing anymore. Not legally, not on paper, not without raising eyebrows. That's when it hit the bigger papers. Maya's second piece went regional, then national. Not viral like a cat video, but loud enough. The farmer who owns the suburbs. That was the headline. It got picked up by an outlet out of Atlanta, then syndicated. People started emailing me from places I'd never been, offering advice, lawyers, even TV interviews. I ignored most of them. I wasn't doing this for the cameras. Back in Whispering Hills, though, things changed. Some folks were furious, said I was trying to hold the community hostage. They tossed words around like extortion and land grab, like I was some corporate raider in a trucker hat. One guy drove past the farm real slow every afternoon for a week, like he thought his Civic was intimidating. But then others started reaching out, quietly. First it was a retired couple. the Turners, I think, who asked if they could come by and just talk. Then a single mom, then 2 more households. They all said the same thing. They didn't know. They'd moved in thinking it was just another safe, clean, well-managed neighborhood. They had no idea the HOA had skipped out on a legal agreement and tried to bury it. Some of them were angry, not at me, but at the board, at the lies, at being dragged into a mess they hadn't signed up for. I invited a few of them to walk the property line with me. I showed them the old survey stakes, the faded lease maps with my dad's pen mark still visible. I didn't yell, didn't accuse, didn't try to convince anyone of anything. I just showed them the truth. That's when the HOA started to crack. 2 board members resigned within the month. The treasurer stepped down for health reasons. Rumors swirled about an emergency vote, financial audits, possible lawsuits from residents against the board. One day, the Whispering Hills website went down for maintenance and didn't come back for nearly a week. Then came the town hall. Not official, just neighbors, packed into the same community center that once told me I wasn't welcome. I didn't want to go at first. I figured they'd try to roast me alive. But then Maya texted me just 2 words. You should. So I went, and yeah, the air was thick. People whispered when I walked in. Some scowled. One guy actually stood up and said, "So what, you think you're our landlord now?" And I told him, "Number, I think I'm the guy whose name is on the deed you're standing on, and I gave you 5 years to be decent about it." That shut him up. I didn't go in there to gloat, I just laid it out. The contract, the facts, the history, and then I told them the truth. I didn't want their homes. I wasn't trying to take their backyards or make them homeless. I just wanted what was fair, the rent owed, the acknowledgement, the respect they'd been withholding since the day my father died. By the end of the night, it was quiet. Tense, sure, but different. I think that's when it started to sink in for them. This wasn't about me trying to take something. It was about me refusing to let them keep stealing it. That was the night the power shifted. And they knew it. Things are quiet now. Not the kind of quiet that comes from being ignored. Not that cold, empty silence I lived in for 5 years. No, this is a different kind. This is the quiet after a storm passes and the trees stop swaying and the birds come back out like nothing happened. It's a quiet that feels earned. I still wake up early, still walk the fields with my coffee, still check the fence line, even though I know no one's coming anymore. Elliot's taller now, shot up like a weed, and he's asking questions I'm not always ready to answer, about responsibility, about standing your ground, about what it means to fight without losing your soul. I just tell him, you don't always need to fight loud, you just need to fight steady. The HOA, what's left of it, went through a kind of controlled collapse. After the board resignations and the press, they voted to dissolve. What rose up in its place isn't perfect, but it's more honest. A committee made up of actual residents who meet in open rooms and return phone calls. They're working on a repayment plan, slow and steady. First payments started coming in, and we put them right into restoring the old East Line fence, the one my grandfather strung with barbed wire before the roads were even paved. I didn't take their homes. I could have pushed harder. Some people told me I should have. Sue for damages, evict, profit. But that was never the point. I wasn't in it to own houses I didn't build or take land I didn't live on. I just wanted my family's name to mean something again. For the paper trail not to end in dust. The funny part, some of them wave now. Real waves. Not the stiff HOA smile kind. The kind neighbors give each other when the world calms down a bit. A few even bring over pies or fresh eggs or ask if they can buy corn direct instead of going through the overpriced farmer's market downtown. I say yes. Why not? Maya still checks in every now and then. Her last piece about the whole thing ran under the title, "The Land Remembers." I told her it sounded too poetic. She said, "Yeah, well, you're a poetic kind of guy when you're pissed off." I keep the lease framed now, not to show off, just to remind myself of how close I came to losing what mattered, not just the land, but the story behind it, the fight, the people, my father. Sometimes I walk out to the back lot, where they once put in benches under that sycamore tree, and sit for a while. They're still there. I left them. They're not HOA benches anymore. They're just benches. Anyone can sit there, even them. And me? I sit a little taller now, not out of pride, just out of peace. I didn't win with fire, I didn't win with noise, I won with a folder and a lockbox, and a memory that wouldn't let go. And that's enough.